Imagine, right, spending like 60 hours a year, so that's a full week and a half of your professional life just sitting in mandatory corporate training. You're watching these videos, clicking through compliance modules, taking those endless multiple choice quizzes, and then you realize you haven't actually learned a single tangible skill that your business needs.
Yeah, it's a brutal realization. And the worst part is it sounds familiar to almost everyone.
Exactly. It's not just a feeling. I mean, it is a statistical reality for millions of workers right now.
Yeah.
The very systems that are supposedly designed to support us at work, they seem to be the exact things slowing us down.
Right. It's this incredibly pervasive frustration because we've built these massive, intricate architectures meant to, manage our human resources. But the daily lived experience of actually navigating those structures, it just feels like running through molasses.
Yeah, molasses is the perfect word for it. And look, whether you are a senior manager tuning in and you're prepping for a massive department reorg, or maybe you're an employee who is just completely exhausted by endless corporate bureaucracy, or even if you're just, an insanely curious mind wanting to understand the mechanics of the modern workplace, you have undoubtedly bumped up against the friction of traditional HR. I mean, we all have.
Oh, absolutely. We've all filled out those forms that seem to just go into a black hole.
Right. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to figure out the underlying mechanics of why this happens. We're going to explore why a department that was, theoretically, originally designed to optimize human potential has kind of evolved into this administrative machine that just frequently hinders actual work.
And we aren't just going to complain about it. I mean, complaining is easy.
Yeah, we're not just venting here. We are going to uncover a radical, heavily evidence-based blueprint for basically tearing that traditional machine down and then rebuilding it from the ground up, but this time around actual work quality.
Exactly. And to anchor this whole exploration, we're diving into a truly fascinating piece of research. It's a comprehensive paper authored by Jonathan H. Westover, PhD. And the title itself is pretty bold. It's called The Case for Dismantling Traditional HR, Redesigning People Operations Around Work Quality, Not Employment Administration.
Okay, let's unpack this because, dismantling traditional HR is a deliberately provocative stance. It sounds almost like anarchic.
It does. It sounds like he wants to just burn the building down.
Right, like just firing everyone in the department. But when you actually read through the research, it becomes immediately clear that he isn't advocating for chaos at all. He is composing this profound structural paradigm shift. And it all pivots on 6 core questions that every single organization needs to, ruthlessly ask itself.
Yeah, that is really the crux of his thesis, because he argues that for the last century, HR has basically been asking the wrong foundational question.
What have they been asking?
Well, they've been obsessed with asking, how do we efficiently manage the administration of employment? The paperwork. But the research insists we must be asking a totally different set of questions. Specifically, how do we make the actual work clearer, fairer, faster, more productive, more humane, and more accountable?
Wow. Clearer, fairer, faster, more productive, more humane, and more accountable. I actually love the tangibility of that. It immediately strips away all that corporate jargon.
Right, there's no driving synergy in that list.
Exactly. Or boosting engagement. It's a literal diagnostic tool for the daily realities of a job.
Precisely. Because right now, as the research really thoroughly documents, traditional HR is suffering from this massive illusion of control.
The illusion of control. Tell me more about that.
Well, the complex systems they've built, they look incredibly efficient if you're just looking at a spreadsheet, but they are fundamentally detached from the reality of how work actually gets done on the floor.
Ah, I see.
And to understand why this structure is so deeply flawed today, we actually have to look backward at its origins. The bureaucratic HR department didn't just magically materialize out of thin air. It is a very specific artifact of industrial era personnel administration.
Okay, so we're talking about the early 1900s factory boom, right? The whole Henry Ford scientific management era.
Exactly. And the historical research details this evolution beautifully. Think about the operational reality of the 1920s. You're suddenly tasked with managing massive, highly standardized workforces in these giant factories.
Right, thousands of people doing basically identical, repetitive physical tasks.
Yeah. So when you have that, you absolutely require standardized processes. You need rigid, heavily centralized systems for, hiring bodies in bulk, standardizing hourly pay, administering very basic benefits, and handling union negotiations.
Which makes perfect sense for an assembly line. I mean, you essentially need a machine to run the human components of a larger industrial machine. The predictability is the entire point.
But here's exactly where the structural flaw gets introduced. As the global economy evolved, right, as organizations grew infinitely more complex, and especially as we shifted heavily into highly nuanced knowledge work, the HR profession just didn't change its fundamental factory era philosophy.
So they didn't rethink their purpose?
No, they didn't. They just bolted on new specialized
Oh,
functions.
wow. So instead of reinventing the wheel for a knowledge economy, they just added more spokes.
Exactly. And today, you look at an org chart and it separates everything. You have talent acquisition sitting over here, learning and development over there, compensation and benefits in another corner, employee relations, and then HR operations.
And I'm guessing none of them talk to each other.
Crucially, no. Each of those specialized functions has developed its own internal ecosystem. They have their own proprietary software systems, their own professional certifications, their own isolated metrics of success, and their own completely rigid service standards.
Okay, but if I'm looking at this from a pure business design perspective, doesn't specialization usually mean better expertise? Like, if I want to hire a brilliant software engineer, I want a recruiter who wakes up every day and only thinks about recruiting. Why does this functional fragmentation fail so spectacularly when it's applied to human resources?
It fails because of a critical foundational distinction that the source material makes. HR is currently organized around owning and executing employment activities rather than optimizing work quality.
Activities versus quality.
Right. It treats a human being's tenure at a company as a series of completely discrete, disconnected administrative events.
I see. So the structure essentially incentivizes tunnel vision. It's honestly a lot like going to a restaurant where the host who seats you, the waiter who takes your order, and the chef who cooks your meal operate in total isolation.
Yes, exactly.
They never actually speak to each other. They just pass a piece of paper along a line. So the host is mathematically optimizing for getting bodies into chairs as fast as possible. The waiter is optimizing their metrics for upselling you on expensive drinks. And the chef is purely optimizing for food cost reduction.
Right. They're all hitting their internal KPIs.
But nobody, literally nobody in the building is actually accountable for the holistic outcome of making sure you have a good dinner.
What's fascinating here is how accurately that restaurant dynamic maps to the academic research on organizational design. There's a vital concept introduced in multi-level service design research known as handoff friction.
Handoff friction, the space between the silos.
Precisely. The research demonstrates that when organizations structure themselves around their own internal specialized functions, rather than around the user's continuous journey, they inevitably create delays. They create errors, data loss, and just a massive degradation of the user experience every single time a task transfers from one department to another.
Okay, let's ground this in reality. Because from the perspective of the employee, this fragmentation is a daily nightmare. Let's imagine a specific scenario for the listener. Let's say we have Sarah. She's a senior marketing manager who has just been promoted to director of regional marketing. Now, from Sarah's perspective, this promotion is a single, integrated reality.
Right. It's just a moment of celebration. It's just her life progressing.
Exactly. It is one continuous biographical event. She is simply taking on a new set of responsibilities within the exact same building.
But the moment that promotion hits the traditional HR structure, Sarah's single life event shatters into 4 completely distinct administrative burdens.
Because it hits all those different silos.
Right. To talent acquisition, Sarah is suddenly an internal applicant who must formally apply an interview just for compliance reasons.
Even though she already got the job.
Yes. Then, to the compensation silo, she is a rebanding exercise that requires market analysis and approval workflows. To learning and development, she is a gap in the leadership matrix who must be assigned new mandatory transition training.
And what about HR operations?
To them, she is a localized IT ticketing issue, because her access permissions to certain software and data dashboards need to be fundamentally rewritten. So Sarah is no longer a human being experiencing a career milestone. She is a fragmented data point navigating 4 completely different bureaucratic mazes.
And each of those silos is going to apply its own timeline, too. Like the recruiters might move fast, but comp might take 3 weeks to approve the salary band. L&D might send her 20 automated emails about leadership modules, while Ops accidentally locks her out of her email for 3 days during the permission switch.
Which happens all the time.
Right. Sarah is forced to become a project manager of her own administrative existence, just trying to figure out who holds the key to the next bottleneck.
And the most tragic, ironic part of that entire scenario is that if you were to open the internal HR dashboard at the end of the quarter, every single one of those functional leaders probably reported that they successfully completed their part of the process.
Oh, totally. Their utilization metrics are all green.
Exactly. The recruiter closed the internal requisition, comp finalized the ban, ops closed the IT ticket.
They all get an A-plus day, but the patient still died. I mean, by the time Sarah actually sits down in the director's chair, she is completely exhausted. She feels undervalued because she had to fight for her salary adjustment. She is demoralized before she even starts doing the actual work she was promoted to do.
The research on human resource management highlights this exact paradox. When functional silos operate independently, optimizing solely for their internal compliance and process speed, the integrated employee experience becomes entirely contradictory. The system optimizes the administration of the event while completely destroying the psychological momentum of the worker.
Man, but, if the structural design is this inherently flawed, and the handoff friction is this painfully obvious to anyone who actually works at a company, surely the executive leadership sees this, right? If the system is this broken, the macroeconomic data has to reflect the damage.
Oh, the data absolutely reflects it, but it also reveals a staggering psychological disconnect within the profession itself. A massive industry study in 2023 looked into this perception gap. They found that an overwhelming 76% of HR professionals rate their own department's effectiveness as good or excellent.
Wait, over three-quarters of HR professionals look at this fragmented, frustrating system and think they're doing a phenomenal job.
Yes. But when they ask the actual business leaders, the executives and line managers operating within those exact same organizations, only 48% agreed that HR was effective. Less than half.
Wow.
And what is most alarming is that this perception gap hasn't remained static. It has actively widened over the last 5 years.
That is a fundamental crisis of self-awareness. Half the business thinks the department is failing, while the department itself is throwing a victory parade. If I'm diagnosing that gap, my instinct is that they aren't even speaking the same language. They have been measuring entirely different realities.
You've hit the nail on the head. It comes back to that distinction between activity and outcome. HR measures the completion of administrative activities. Did we fill the open headcount requisition? Did we deliver the mandated compliance training hours? Did we close the employee portal ticket within 48 hours?
Right. Check, check, check.
But the business leaders are evaluating reality-based outcomes. Are our teams actually productive? Do our engineers have the cutting-edge capabilities we desperately need to ship this product? Are we actually retaining our most critical, high-performing talent?
Okay, let's dive deep into some of these specific functional failures, because the source material brings receipts, and the data is honestly jarring. Let's start with talent acquisition recruiting. Traditional HR loves to celebrate a metric called time to fill. It is like the ultimate badge of honor for a recruiter to get a requisition, source a candidate, and put a warm body into a desk as quickly as possible just to get the activity off their plate.
But we have to look at the collateral damage of prioritizing speed of process over quality of outcome. The industry data shows, from Global Talent Trends in 2023, a shocking 43% of new hires do not meet their performance expectations within their first year on the job.
Wait, 43%? Almost half of all the people hired are essentially failing or underperforming. That is a colossal misallocation of capital and time.
It is massive. Yet traditional recruiting functions rarely own, track, or are held accountable for that first-year productivity outcome. They wash their hands the moment the offer letter is signed.
Not my department anymore.
Exactly. Furthermore, benchmarking data exposes another massive vulnerability. Conventional corporate recruiting processes, laden with multiple rounds of behavioral interviews, consensus gathering among hiring panels, and HR compliance checks, they take an average of 6 to 8 weeks to complete.
Oh, man. In a hyper-competitive market for specialized talent, 6 to 8 weeks is a lifetime.
Exactly. And the data shows that in highly competitive fields like advanced software engineering or specialized medical roles, that deliberate compliance-heavy process results in offer acceptance rates plummeting below 40%.
Because the top-tier candidates aren't going to wait 2 months for HR to schedule a final round interview. They're getting scooped up by a competitor who moved aggressively and made an offer in 10 days.
Exactly.
So the business is literally losing its strategic advantage. They're bleeding out top talent, because HR values its own internal process compliance more than it values the business outcome of securing the best person.
Precisely. Now let's pivot to performance management, which is perhaps the most universally despised element of traditional HR. A sweeping survey of over 800 organizations found that an incredible 64% of managers rated their company's performance management systems as ineffective or worse, actively counterproductive.
I really want to pause on that word, counterproductive.
That implies that the system explicitly designed to improve and manage performance is actually doing structural damage to the work. It is literally making people worse at their jobs. Yes. The rigidity of annual reviews, forced ranking curves, and bureaucratic goal setting, they actively demotivate employees and create adversarial relationships between managers and their teams.
So why do we keep doing it?
Well, here is the crucial disconnect. HR departments continued to pour millions of dollars into purchasing and maintaining these complex software systems. Why? Because the utilization rates look acceptable on their departmental dashboard.
It is the ultimate triumph of the checkbox. Did 95% of our managers fill out the 9-box grid and submit the digital form by November 15th? Yes. Box checked. System is a success.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if the actual conversation between the manager and the employee was superficial, anxiety-inducing, or actively destroy the employee's motivation for the next 6 months.
And this administrative blindness leads directly to the retention crisis. We hear executives lamenting turnover rates constantly, but traditional HR dashboards treat all turnover as mathematically identical. A 10% annualized turnover rate is just a sterile number on a slide deck.
Right, a body is a body.
But the research found something critical that fundamentally breaks traditional cost per hire models. High-performing employees are 3.5 times more likely to leave than average performers when they perceive unfair treatment, bureaucratic friction, or a lack of transparent growth opportunities.
We really have to unpack the gravity of that. The people you least want to lose, the 10X engineers, the top-tier sales directors, the innovators who carry all the institutional knowledge, they are the ones who have the least tolerance for a system that feels like a bureaucratic obstacle course.
Right, because they have options. They don't have to tolerate the friction.
Exactly. And when a high performer leaves, you don't just lose their salary equivalent. You lose their outsized productivity, you lose the gravitational pull they have on their peers, and you lose the relationships they hold with clients.
But a standard HR exit interview simply logs their departure into a drop-down menu, left for better compensation or career pivot, and all that nuance is entirely lost.
If we look at the psychology behind this, why are those high performers so deeply sensitive to this friction? Why does a clunky performance review or a delayed promotion trigger them to actually quit?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we're looking at a foundational concept in organizational psychology called psychological contract violations. This framework is crucial to understanding modern workplace dynamics. The psychological contract is not the piece of paper you sign when you are hired.
Okay, what is it then?
It is the complex, unwritten, deeply felt set of expectations and reciprocal obligations between an employee and their employer.
It's the implicit promise. Like, if I give you my discretionary effort, if I work through the weekend to launch this product, you will recognize my value, support my career trajectory, and just treat me as a rational adult.
Exactly. When employees experience a chronic disconnect between what the corporate culture and HR programs implicitly promise, which is usually meaningful feedback, fair treatment, and bespoke career development, and what they actually deliver, which is generic compliance training, convoluted policies, and checkbox performance reviews, they experience a severe breach of that psychological contract.
So it isn't just a fleeting feeling of annoyance, it is a literal sense of betrayal.
Yes.
Let's say a worker gives up a month of weekends to save a failing project, and at the end of the year, they get a generic meets expectations rating simply because HR mandated a forced bell curve and the manager was only allowed to give out 2 exceeds ratings. The psychological contract isn't just breached, it is completely shattered.
And the behavioral consequences are devastating. Decades of research show that these contract violations drastically and permanently reduce discretionary effort, crater employee engagement, and actively increase counterproductive workplace behaviors.
People thought caring. They resort to quiet quitting, doing the absolute bare minimum to avoid getting fired, or they just walk out the door. The friction actively kills the spirit of the workforce.
And the mundane, day-to-day technological interactions only exacerbate this feeling of betrayal. Researchers identified what they termed an HR service experience gap. Simply put, employees rate their internal HR service experiences far, far below their baseline expectations as modern consumers.
Oh, this makes me think of the Forrester research data from 2023. They surveyed over 10,000 global employees specifically about their workplace technology, right? And HR systems ranked at the absolute bottom of the barrel in user satisfaction.
Bottom of the barrel.
Employees reported that the systems were labyrinthine, entirely irrelevant to their actual daily workflows, and nakedly designed to serve HR's compliance needs rather than the employee's productivity needs.
Which ultimately shifts a massive, invisible administrative burden onto the rest of the company.
I really want to translate this directly to the listeners right now. If you are a middle manager tuning in, the recent global human capital trends data finally put a mathematical number on your invisible pain. Managers self-report wasting between 8 to 12 hours every single month exclusively on HR-required administrative activities.
Just think about that.
Documenting performance minutia, updating clunky software systems, doing the busy work of recruiting administration, that is a full working day or more stolen every month from actual strategic thinking and genuine people leadership.
And the employees beneath those managers are spending countless unmeasured hours navigating obscure benefits portals, updating internal profiles nobody reads, and clicking through redundant compliance training. That is time and cognitive energy explicitly not spent in generating value for the business.
So the ultimate inevitable fallout of all this friction, all this bureaucracy, and all these broken promises is the total erosion of trust.
Yeah.
There was a survey of employees a couple of years ago asking them a very simple question. Who do you actually trust when you have a workplace issue or a serious concern?
The results were pretty damning.
Traditional HR ranked below immediate managers, below peer colleagues, and staggeringly below external sources like friends, family, or internet forums. Employees literally trust anonymous people on Reddit more than they trust the department whose actual name is Human Resources.
Because through repeated interaction, employees have learned to view HR purely as an instrument of organizational self-interest. They see HR as a mechanism for legal compliance, corporate risk management, and cost control, rather than an advocate for fair treatment, career enablement, and genuine problem resolution.
Okay, so the diagnostic phase of our deep dive paints a pretty grim picture. The industrial era employment administration model is fundamentally broken. It actively drains productivity, it drives away our highest performers, and it annihilates institutional trust. So how do we tear it down and build something better?
Well, the author outlines 3 major transformation areas to pivot from administration to work quality.
Let's dive into the first one, which is arguably the most sensitive, perhaps most controversial area, employee relations.
This represents a profound structural and philosophical shift. Traditional employee relations, or ER, is almost entirely reactive. It basically operates on a damage control model.
Right. It's the corporate fire department. Someone files a formal complaint regarding harassment, bias, or a toxic manager, and HR swoops in to conduct an investigation, mediate the dispute, and primarily figure out how to mitigate the legal and reputational risk to the company. They are the defense shields.
Exactly. They exist to put out fires that have already started. But the new model proposed by the research, drawing heavily on modern organizational design, is called trust architecture.
Trust architecture. I like the sound of that. What is it?
It is about proactively engineering workplace conditions, systems, and incentives where fair treatment, deep psychological safety, and transparent accountability are the default everyday reality. It's not just a crisis protocol you activate when someone threatens a lawsuit.
And once again, there is hard empirical data backing up why this shift isn't just some cultural nicety, but an economic imperative. The research on the neuroscience of trust is absolutely mind-blowing. It shows that high-trust organizations, meaning environments where people genuinely believe the systems treat them fairly and their leaders operate with integrity, see massive dividends.
The differentials are staggering. High-trust companies experience 50% higher overall productivity,
76% higher employee engagement,
74% less reported stress,
and 40% less burnout compared to low-trust organizations. I mean, those aren't just marginal improvements in employee surveys. Those are massive structural performance advantages that completely define whether a company survives or dies in a competitive market.
So the mandate is clear. Trust is the most valuable currency in an organization. The question is, how do you actually build this trust architecture operationally?
The source material provides a fascinating case study of Patagonia, the global outdoor apparel company, right?
Yeah.
Their approach to employee relations is radically decentralized. Walk us through what Patagonia actually did.
Instead of harboring a centralized, powerful group of HR specialists who handle all the conflict resolution, grievance mediation, and trust issues, Patagonia distributes that fundamental responsibility directly down to the department leaders and line managers. The leaders themselves are explicitly required to own the trust building and conflict resolution within their teams.
Okay, but if the managers are doing the mediation and handling the disputes, what exactly does HR do at Patagonia? Do they just sit back and watch?
Not at all. Their role shifts from being the police to being the architects. HR focuses intensely on designing rigorously fair systems and intensely coaching those leaders on how to use them.
Ah, so they're the support system.
Exactly. HR only steps into the fray to conduct formal, centralized investigations when there is a strict, undeniable legal or regulatory requirement to do so. Otherwise, their primary job is to equip managers with the psychological tools and frameworks to handle concerns through direct, transparent adult conversations within the flow of daily work.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second because this is where the theory bumps up against messy human reality.
Go for it.
If we take conflict resolution and investigations away from a centralized HR authority and hand that power over to individual managers, aren't we creating a massive vulnerability? What if the manager is the problem? What if the manager is biased, toxic, or retaliatory? By decentralizing this, aren't we just handing the keys to the asylum over to the inmates?
That is the exact right vulnerability to probe, and it is precisely why trust architecture cannot just be a philosophical buzzword or an empty mandate to trust your managers. It must be rigidly supported by three non-negotiable operational pillars. Without these pillars, the system collapses into favoritism.
Okay, what's the first pillar?
The first pillar is transparent decision-making frameworks.
Meaning, a manager can't just make a unilateral decision affecting someone's livelihood based on a gut feeling in a closed-door meeting.
Exactly. Organizations must explicitly and publicly communicate how employment decisions are engineered, not just announcing the final outcome, but illuminating the entire structural process.
Like, how do promotions actually happen?
Yes. How, mathematically and behaviorally, do promotions work here? How is compensation formally decided and banded? What are the exact objective criteria for getting assigned to a high-visibility project? Or conversely, what are the criteria for termination? This criteria must be codified, accessible, and understood by all employees long before any decisions are actually made.
So, in a place like Patagonia, if a manager denies someone a promotion, they can't just say, "You aren't ready." They have to point to the documented, transparent criteria that are applied consistently across the company. The employee understands the physics of the decision.
And crucially, this transparency must be paired with accessible, formalized appeal mechanisms. If an employee feels a decision was made outside the transparent framework, there must be a pathway to challenge it. And a pathway that actually possesses the structural power to overturn outcomes, not just performative listening sessions that pacify the employee, but change nothing.
That structural check is vital. What is the second pillar of this trust architecture?
Distributed accountability systems. This directly addresses your concern about toxic managers hoarding power. You do not just hand managers the authority over employee relations and walk away hoping for the best. You hold senior leadership and middle managers visibly mathematically accountable for the trust outcomes generated within their specific departments.
How do you mathematically measure something as nebulous as trust, though?
You measure it through highly specific team-level behavioral indicators. Do employees in the specific department exhibit speak-up behavior? Do they voluntarily seek help when they make a mistake? Or do they hide errors out of fear? Are they comfortable expressing dissenting opinions in strategy meetings?
So you look for the behaviors that prove trust exists.
Exactly. You evaluate and compensate managers based on these leading indicators of psychological safety rather than just praising them because HR didn't receive any formal harassment complaints from their team.
Well, that is a profound shift in perspective. Because a traditional HR department assumes that zero formal grievances means the manager is doing a great job. But in reality, zero complaints might just mean the culture is so toxic and retaliatory that people are absolutely terrified to speak up.
Right.
Measuring the presence of healthy friction, dissent, debate, admission of error is a far more accurate barometer of trust than measuring the absence of formal paperwork.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third and final pillar, proactive fairness monitoring. This is where the modern HR department's analytical capabilities really shine. Instead of sitting back and waiting for an employee to gather the courage to file a formal discrimination or bias complaint, HR should be acting as systemic auditors.
What does that look like in practice?
They should be constantly scraping and analyzing employment outcomes, pay distribution, promotion velocity, performance review ratings, and termination rates, actively hunting for unexplained demographic disparities or localized bias before they surface as explosive complaints.
It is the difference between an autopsy and a diagnostic test.
Yes, perfect analogy.
A traditional investigation is an autopsy. It tells you exactly why the culture died, but it's too late to save it. Proactive fairness monitoring is diagnostic medicine, like HR runs a data audit, notices that a specific engineering director consistently gives female engineers 15% lower performance ratings than male engineers, and intervenes to correct the manager's rubric and biases before the merit cycle even finalizes.
And before the employees even realize they were being marginalized, you fundamentally shift the HR function from doing reactive damage control to engineering a resilient, structurally fair ecosystem.
Okay, so trust is the bedrock. You absolutely must have it before anything else can function. But once you have established a trusting, fair environment, how do you actually elevate the people within it? How do you make them better at the highly technical work they do?
This leads us to the second major transformation area identified in the research, shifting from content delivery to capability building. This section is just a devastating critique of the absolute failure of traditional corporate training.
And failure is unfortunately the most scientifically accurate word to use here. Traditional learning and development, or L&D, is pathologically obsessed with content administration. Their metrics of success are building massive course catalogs, policing whether people click through the mandatory annual compliance modules, and boasting about total organizational training hours logged.
It treats the administration of the training as the final output, completely ignoring whether the acquisition of a new skill actually occurred as the outcome.
Precisely. And the academic evidence exposing this failure is unambiguous. There's comprehensive studies on training transfer, which is the scientific term for the degree to which a concept learned in an artificial classroom environment actually changes an employee's physical behavior when they return to their actual job.
Right. And do you know what the transfer rates are?
I do. For traditional corporate training programs, they hover between a dismal 10% and 30%.
Let that sink in. That means that 70% to 90% of the millions of hours and billions of dollars poured into traditional corporate training is a complete and utter waste. The knowledge simply evaporates the moment the employee closes the browser tab or walks out of the seminar room.
The internal corporate data aggressively supports this academic finding too. IBM conducted a very revealing internal analysis back in 2021. They comprehensively mapped the existing capabilities of their technical workforce against the specific technical skills the business actually needed to execute its 3-year strategic plan. And they discovered a massive 30% gap in necessary skills across their workforce.
Which, if you were a traditional L&D professional, you would immediately diagnose as a lack of training volume. We just need to put them in more classes.
Except IBM found this terrifying 30% skill gap, despite the fact that their employees were already completing an average of 60 hours of formal training annually.
60 hours. That is a week and a half of doing absolutely nothing but consuming training content, and the workforce still didn't possess the capabilities the business needed to survive.
Because the entire L&D philosophy was flawed. They were delivering standardized content based on theoretical curriculum design rather than aggressively building targeted capabilities based on actual daily performance requirements.
Yeah, a Boston Consulting Group study found a similar paradox. 89% of surveyed employees successfully completed their assigned corporate training, but only 37% felt the training actually equipped them with the skills required to do their jobs better.
It's the illusion of learning. It's exactly like watching 60 hours of high-definition YouTube videos on the precise physics and mechanics of how to ride a bicycle. You can memorize the gear ratios, you can effortlessly pass a multiple-choice test on the mechanics of pedaling, and your HR dashboard will proudly display a 100% completion rate for your bicycle curriculum.
Right.
But the second you step outside, straddle an actual physical bicycle, and try to pedal, you immediately fall over and scrape your knee. Because you cannot build complex capability passively.
That analogy captures the cognitive disconnect perfectly. The human brain does not retain complex skills through passive consumption. If we look at the cognitive psychology behind this, we encounter the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
Walk us through that because it explains the why behind the failure perfectly.
So Hermann Ebbinghaus was a pioneering psychologist who studied memory retention. The forgetting curve demonstrates that when humans passively consume information like sitting in a lecture or clicking through a PowerPoint without immediate contextual application, they will forget roughly 70% of that new information within 24 hours.
70% in one day.
Yeah. The brain ruthlessly prunes data it doesn't immediately need to survive or perform tasks. Traditional corporate training completely ignores this biological reality.
So how did a massive organization actually fix this?
Yeah.
How do you defeat the forgetting curve? The source material brings up Microsoft's sweeping 2017 L&D transformation.
Yeah.
What did they fundamentally change?
They took a shockingly radical structural approach. They didn't just tweak the system, they eliminated the vast majority of their traditional centralized training courses entirely.
Wait, they just deleted the course catalog?
Yes. They shifted their entire operational model from instructional design writing curriculums to what they termed learning architecture. They restructured the acquisition of knowledge around three deeply integrated mechanisms. First, they pivoted to manager-led coaching, deeply rooted in research-based psychological frameworks like the growth mindset. Second, and most importantly, they embraced real-work learning integration.
Let's break that down. What does real work learning integration look like on a Tuesday afternoon for a normal employee?
It means structuring actual revenue-generating work assignments explicitly for the purpose of building capabilities. If a software engineer needs to learn a new complex cloud architecture, you do not pull them offline for a 3-day seminar in a sterile conference room.
Right.
Instead, you assign them to a low-risk, real-world project that explicitly requires the use of that new architecture. But, and this is the key, you provide them with a dedicated technical coach, progressive challenge milestones, and a psychologically safe space to make errors without blowing up the core product.
So instead of making you watch the YouTube video about the bicycle, Microsoft literally puts you on the bicycle.
Yeah.
But they have a manager or a senior peer running alongside you, holding the seat to keep you balanced, giving you micro-corrections in real time until you find your own equilibrium.
Exactly. It creates what the research refers to as learning loops. You attempt a new technical skill in the chaotic context of your actual daily work. You experience friction or failure. You receive rapid, immediate feedback from your coach. You dynamically adjust your approach, and you try again immediately. The artificial, bureaucratic separation between learning time and working time is completely obliterated.
That's brilliant.
Capability building becomes the very mechanism by which the work gets done.
The cognitive load is immediately applied to a physical or digital task, forcing the neural pathways to solidify. That completely defeats the forgetting curve. And what was the third mechanism Microsoft utilized?
Peer learning communities. They realized that centralized HR departments cannot possibly keep pace with the speed of technological change. So they created structural spaces where employees who were actively trying to develop similar capabilities could organically learn from each other's live experiments and failures, rather than waiting for an HR instructional designer to build a formal curriculum.
So if I'm a marketing manager trying to figure out how to leverage a brand new generative AI tool to write copy, I don't submit a request to HR and wait 6 months for them to build a compliance-approved AI course. I just jump into a dedicated internal forum, connect with 3 other marketing teams across the globe who've been experimenting with it for 2 weeks, and we share our prompt structures and our failures in real time.
Precisely. And under this model, HR measures success not by tracking arbitrary training hours logged, but by tracking capability demonstration within actual work outputs, and by measuring the velocity of organizational learning. Like, how fast can the entire company acquire, refine, and deploy a new critical skill through these peer networks?
Building capability in the flow of work is a brilliant, necessary evolution. But let's be brutally honest for a moment. All of that brilliant coaching, all those dynamic learning loops, and all of that trust architecture is incredibly fragile. It is easily, instantly derailed if your basic, fundamental administrative interactions with the company are a nightmare.
Very true.
Which brings us to the third vital transformation area, HR operations. We have to move from a philosophy of ticket closure to a philosophy of experience design.
HR operations is the engine room of the department. They handle the transactional realities of employment. Payroll adjustments, benefits enrollment, policy clarification, and administrative processing. And just like we discussed with recruiting and L&D, operations is historically organized around processing volume as efficiently as possible.
Right. The operational metrics are all volume-based. How fast can we close this IT access ticket? How many thousands of benefits inquiries did our call center resolve today?
But this industrial-era efficiency model completely ignores the emotional and productivity cost of the user experience. Modern service design research unequivocally tells us that highly effective service organizations do not design their structures around their own internal processing efficiency. They design them entirely around user journeys and the ultimate resolution of the user's core problem.
It's that consumer expectation gap we touched on earlier, rearing its head again. If I pause and think about it, the contrast is truly jarring. If I want to buy a coffee before work, I could open an app on my phone, customize my order down to the exact temperature of the oat milk and the number of espresso shots, pay instantly using facial recognition, and walk into a store 3 minutes later to find my exact beverage waiting on a counter with my name printed on it. It is seamless, frictionless, and bespoke.
Yeah, we expect it to be perfect.
But if I want to execute a simple update to my direct deposit information at my corporate job, it requires sending 3 emails to a generic inbox, navigating a clunky, visually offensive intranet site built in 2008, downloading a static PDF form, printing it out on paper, signing it with a pen, scanning it back into the computer, emailing it to a different department, and then waiting 2 anxiety-inducing weeks to see if my next paycheck actually hits the right bank account.
The cognitive dissonance between how we interact with consumer technology and how we interact with workplace technology breeds immense silent frustration. It signals to the employee that their time is fundamentally not valued by the organization. This is exactly where the discipline of experience design intervenes. The research highlights Unilever's radical, ground-up redesign of their HR operations as the gold standard case study for this shift.
If I'm an executive at Unilever and I'm staring at this fragmented, frustrating nightmare of forms and portals, my instinct as a traditional business leader would probably be to just throw money at the problem. I'd want to buy a massive, hyper-expensive, unified HR software suite and hope the technology fixes the friction. Is that what Unilever did, or did they fundamentally change the structural approach?
They realized that technology alone merely digitizes bad processes. Before they touched the software, they fundamentally changed the structural perspective. They completely mapped out the end-to-end employee journeys from the perspective of the employee, not the HR administrator.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah, they didn't just look at isolated, siloed processes like benefits enrollment or payroll setup. They looked holistically at the continuous human experience of, for instance, starting a new job or transitioning to a new country for an expatriate assignment. They ruthlessly identified every single point of handoff friction.
And when they mapped that out, what did they actually find lurking in the bureaucracy?
The discoveries were shocking. For the onboarding journey of new hires alone, by taking a holistic view, integrating disparate back-end systems through API layers, and heavily automating routine data transactions, Unilever was able to permanently eliminate 27 separate manual HR interactions.
27 interactions.
Yeah.
Let's pause and genuinely imagine the psychological relief of that. Imagine being a new hire, already stressed about proving yourself in a new role, and discovering you have 27 fewer forms to sign, 27 fewer automated emails to decipher, and 27 fewer obscure portals to create passwords for in your first week.
The business impact was immediate and measurable. By eliminating that administrative labyrinth, Unilever achieved an estimated 30% reduction in time to productivity. Their new hires were fully integrated, up and running, and actually executing the highly skilled work they were hired to do 30% faster than before, all because they stopped drowning them in onboarding paperwork.
Because they fundamentally changed the DNA of the HR operations roles. They transitioned their staff from being reactive ticket processors to being proactive, experienced designers. They stopped rewarding staff for how many tickets they closed and started evaluating them on journey success rates, dramatic reductions in employee effort scores, and total time saved for the business.
To execute this model effectively across a massive global enterprise, organizations implement a structural framework known as a tiered service architecture.
Break the mechanics of that architecture down for me. How does it function in reality?
It is a highly intentional, multi-layered approach to resolving employee friction. Tier 1 is absolute, immediate self-service for straightforward, high-volume transactions. This means utilizing intuitive mobile apps, AI-driven chatbots, and clear knowledge bases for things like checking PTO balances, updating emergency contacts, or downloading tax forms. It should be as frictionless and immediate as your coffee app.
Okay, got it.
Tier 2 provides rapid, human-in-the-loop assistance for nuanced questions that require interpretation or light problem-solving situations where the policy is gray or an error occurred. And Tier 3 explicitly reserves the deep, highly trained specialist involvement for complex, high-stakes, or highly sensitive cases.
Let's run a specific scenario scenario through that architecture to see how it flows. Let's say an employee has to go on sudden, unexpected medical leave.
Perfect example. Under this architecture, the employee initiates the process in Tier 1 through a mobile app. The app automatically cross-references their tenure and state location, instantly verifying their eligibility for federal FMLA and state-level protections, and generates the required baseline paperwork without human intervention.
But medical leave is notoriously complex. What if their specific state recently passed a new paid family leave law, and the employee is confused about how it interacts with their corporate short-term disability policy? The app can't handle that nuance.
Exactly. That is where they seamlessly escalate to Tier 2. A human representative steps in, reviews the exact context already established by the app, and clarifies the specific state-level nuance for the employee over chat or a quick phone call.
And what if the situation escalates further? What if the employee's short-term disability claim is unexpectedly denied by the third-party insurance vendor, and they are suddenly facing a financial crisis while hospitalized?
That immediately triggers an escalation to Tier 3. A senior benefits specialist takes ownership of the case. But here is the critical architectural mandate. The transitions between these tiers must flawlessly preserve the context. The Tier 3 specialist already has access to the Tier 1 app data and the transcript of the Tier 2 conversation in a unified case file. If the hospitalized employee has to explain their medical crisis and insurance denial 3 different times to 3 different people, the architecture has fundamentally failed.
Which is exactly what happens in traditional HR constantly. Please hold while I transfer you to the benefits department. Okay, can you please repeat everything you just spent 20 minutes explaining to the previous representative? It is maddening, and when you are dealing with something as sensitive as a medical leave, it is actively cruel.
The final evolutionary piece of experience design is shifting the entire operational posture from reactive response to proactive service. It means utilizing the vast amounts of internal data to accurately anticipate employee needs before they even articulate them.
Give me an example of that.
For example, if an employee logs into the system and updates their profile to indicate they recently had a child, a proactive service model does not sit back and wait for that exhausted new parent to submit a ticket asking about parental leave policies or how to add a dependent to their health insurance. The system instantly recognizes the life event and automatically pushes a curated, customized package of relevant information, action items, and support resources directly to them.
It anticipates the friction before it becomes a bottleneck.
Mhm.
I absolutely love that. So, Unilever streamlining the rules and hiding the complexity behind a sleek interface is a massive leap forward. But it begs a deeper philosophical question. What if the massive, sprawling rules themselves are the core problem? What if digitizing a bad policy just makes a bad policy faster? This brings us to what I consider the most radical, paradigm-breaking concept in this entire deep dive: blowing up the corporate policy manual and embracing distributed ownership.
This is where we confront HR's illusion of control head-on, and it is often terrifying for traditional practitioners. Traditional HR departments derive a massive amount of their perceived authority and comfort from maintaining a comprehensive, encyclopedic policy manual that attempts to rigidly address every conceivable human situation that could possibly arise in the workplace.
Oh yes, the legendary 300-page PDF employee handbook that every single new hire signs on their first day, and literally nobody, not even the people who wrote it, ever reads again.
Exactly. The foundational, unquestioned assumption in traditional HR is that comprehensive, hyper-specific rules guarantee fairness, ensure legal compliance, and mitigate risk. But fascinating research regarding organizational rulemaking reveals the exact opposite dynamic. They found that policy proliferation, the constant addition of new rules to cover new edge cases, actually reduces overall compliance and actively degrades systemic fairness.
Wait, I need you to explain the mechanics of that. How can adding more rules mathematically result in less compliance? That seems entirely counterintuitive.
Because the sheer complexity of the rulebook eventually overwhelms human comprehension. Employees simply cannot follow rules they do not remember or understand. Managers cannot consistently apply policies that require a law degree to interpret. And most dangerously, when you possess a massive convoluted rulebook, you actually create a sprawling playground for bias and selective enforcement.
Ah, I see it now. Because nobody can follow all the rules all the time, managers can weaponize obscure policies to punish employees they personally dislike, while conveniently ignoring those exact same infractions for their favorite team members. The complexity creates the illusion of objective control, but in reality, it just provides a smokescreen for subjective favoritism. It actively undermines the trust architecture we talked about earlier.
Precisely. So the structural shift required to fix this, according to the research on the future of work, is radical simplification combined with distributing the ownership of people operations directly to the line managers. Under this model, HR permanently stops acting as the bureaucratic process owner and transitions entirely into the role of an expert guide and system architect.
This aligns perfectly with the Barry Wimmeler case study mentioned in the text, right?
Yes. Barry Wemler is a massive global supplier of manufacturing technology and capital equipment, and their structural approach to HR is utterly fascinating. To drive this distributed ownership model, they took a sledgehammer to their org chart. They completely eliminated traditional HR business partner roles.
Wait, they just wipe the role off the map entirely?
Completely. Instead of relying on HR intermediaries, they systematically trained every single one of their line leaders in a philosophy they call people leadership stewardship. The core, uncompromising philosophy is that creating a high-functioning work environment where people feel valued, supported, and productive is not an HR department's job. It is the fundamental, primary responsibility of the leader managing that team.
So the engineering leaders, the manufacturing floor managers, the sales directors, they do their own hiring interviews. They own the onboarding experience of their new team members. They manage the retention efforts, and they handle the interpersonal conflicts. HR is strictly there in the background to provide the structural frameworks and offer specialized coaching when things get complex.
Correct. And Netflix provides another globally recognized example of this radical simplification in action. When they scaled, they realized a massive policy manual would throttle their agility. So they famously replaced their comprehensive rulebook with a concise set of core principles.
Right, the legendary Netflix culture deck. They rely on cultural maxims like, we're a high-performing team, not a family, or context, not control. They famously have an unlimited vacation policy, which isn't actually a policy at all. It's simply a guiding principle of take what you need to recharge, ensure your work is covered, and don't abuse the trust.
Exactly. They inherently trust their managers to apply context and judgment to human situations. They provide extremely clear principles explaining what the organization values and why it values those things, rather than attempting to pre-specify the exact bureaucratic reaction to every single scenario in a rigid rulebook.
Okay, I have to step in and push back aggressively here, because reading this, it sounds wonderfully utopian. Trust everyone, burn the 300-page rulebook, let managers manage like adults. But if I am a middle manager at a high-growth company, I am already drowning. You have just handed me a massive, uncompensated second job.
I hear this all the time.
Right. How on earth do I have the time or energy to do my actual work, hitting my aggressive quarterly sales quotas, shipping complex software code, managing a supply chain if I am now entirely personally responsible for sourcing candidates, coaching underperformers, designing onboarding journeys, and mediating team disputes? Isn't this just a clever corporate trick to offload HR's expensive workload onto an already burned-out management tier?
This raises an incredibly important question, and it is universally the most common objection raised when organizations attempt this transition. But the author's argument, heavily supported by modern leadership research, points to a fundamental, systemic misunderstanding of what a manager's job actually is. People leadership is not an administrative side task that distracts a manager from their actual work. Driving outcomes through the capability and alignment of people is the core job of a manager.
So if you are a manager and you think that taking the time to carefully hire someone or deeply coach a struggling employee is distracting you from your real job, you fundamentally do not understand your role in the organization. Your job is not to write code anymore. Your job is to build a team that writes brilliant code.
Exactly. And the historical problem is that by concentrating all the specialized people expertise and administrative power inside a centralized HR silo for decades, organizations have created deep manager dependency. Managers have been structurally conditioned to abdicate their core leadership accountabilities. Oh, my team's engagement scores are plummeting. I better call my HR business partner to come run a workshop and fix it. No. That is the manager's foundational responsibility to solve.
But to be clear, under this new model, HR doesn't just abandon these managers to figure it out on their own, right?
Right.
They don't just hand them the keys to the hiring portal and say, good luck, please try not to get us sued for discrimination.
Not at all. That would be a dereliction of duty. HR's new elevated role is to build simple, highly usable, bias-resistant decision frameworks for these managers to operate within. HR acts as high-level expert consultants. They rigorously design the technical and psychological systems that managers use daily. They aggressively build manager capability through continuous coaching and feedback. And they step in to take the wheel during highly complex, legally sensitive, or specialized situations. But they fundamentally cease to hoard the authority, and they stop acting as routine, bureaucratic gatekeepers for everyday decisions.
It's the classic difference between HR acting as a personal chef who cooks every single meal for you versus HR acting as a master culinary instructor who teaches you the fundamental techniques of cooking, gives you a brilliant, simple recipe book, and ensures your kitchen is fully stocked with the right tools. You have to cook your own dinner, but you are set up for absolute success.
Yes, that is a perfect framing. And crucially, if you are going to empower managers with this level of distributed authority, you must systematically measure their capability and hold them rigidly accountable for the human outcomes they generate.
Which acts as the perfect bridge to the final critical piece of this entire puzzle. Sustaining the change.
Yeah.
If you distribute all this operational ownership down to the managers, and if you eliminate the rigid, comforting safety net of the massive policy rulebooks, you absolutely must construct rigorous, unshakable underlying support systems. Otherwise, this entire utopian vision collapses into chaotic fiefdoms and massive legal liability.
You do. Shifting to this work quality model is not a one-and-done corporate restructuring where you change some titles on an org chart and declare victory. You have to actively build and maintain long-term organizational capabilities. And the very bedrock of that sustainability starts with entirely new, outcome-driven measurement systems.
We touched on this concept earlier, the desperate need to move away from celebrating activity metrics like number of IT tickets closed or hours of training logged. So if we discard those, what exactly should we be measuring? The author proposes a framework he calls work quality indicators.
Yes, these work quality indicators are the new dashboard, and importantly, these are metrics owned cross-functionally by the business leaders, not just isolated within HR. They are laser-focused on diagnosing those 6 core questions we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Let's run through them one by one, because the mechanics of how you measure these are fascinating. How do we practically measure clarity?
You measure clarity by evaluating whether employees actually comprehend their strategic goals, their specific role boundaries, their exact decision-making authority, and the objective success criteria for their current projects. You measure this through rapid pulse survey diagnostics and peer feedback, not just by checking a box that they signed a static job description on their first day.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving to the second indicator, fairness. How do you quantify fairness without it just being a subjective feeling?
You approach it from 2 angles. Subjectively, you measure whether employees perceive equitable treatment regarding opportunity and recognition. Objectively, as we discussed with the trust architecture, HR actively runs statistical analyses on all major employment outcomes: pay bands, promotion velocity, performance ratings, hunting for unexplained demographic disparities. Fairness becomes a mathematical audit, not just a cultural aspiration.
Third indicator, speed.
Speed is measured by organizational agility. What is the time to competency from the moment a business need is identified to the moment the workforce possesses the capability to execute it? Or what is the cycle time from the identification of a structural workplace problem to the implementation of a resolution? Notice, it is not measuring how fast HR replied to an email. It is measuring the speed of business capability.
Fourth indicator is productivity.
This is the most traditional business metric, but it must be tightly coupled with the others. You look at gross output per employee, revenue generated per full-time equivalent, or the time to value for newly launched strategic initiatives.
The fifth indicator is humanity. I absolutely love that this is elevated to the level of a core business metric alongside revenue. How do you mathematically measure humanity in a corporate environment?
By rigorously tracking leading indicators of human sustainability. You monitor self-reported stress levels, you measure the reality of work-life integration. Are people logging off or are they sending emails at 2 a.m.? You assess the depth of psychological safety, and you measure the authentic sense of belonging and inclusion within localized teams.
And the final indicator is accountability.
Accountability asks the structural questions. Do individuals have clear, undisputed ownership of outcomes? Are there actual transparent consequences, both positive and negative, for the results generated? Is there deep transparency about how performance is evaluated across the organization?
To measure these 6 indicators effectively, the text emphasizes the critical importance of balancing leading versus lagging metrics. This is a concept borrowed from economics, but how does it apply to human resources? Can you break down the difference for the listener?
Absolutely. It is a vital distinction. A lagging metric tells you what has already happened in the past. It is historical data. Employee retention is a classic lagging metric. By the time your HR dashboard tells you that your annualized turnover rate has spiked to 20%, it is entirely too late. Those highly trained people have already packed up their desks, taken their institutional knowledge, and gone to work for your competitor. You cannot fix it. Overall productivity and revenue are also often lagging metrics.
To use a medical analogy, relying on a lagging metric is like performing an autopsy to figure out why a patient had a cough. The autopsy is 100% mathematically accurate, but it is entirely useless for actually saving the patient's life. We need proactive diagnostics, not historical autopsies.
That is exactly right. Leading indicators, on the other hand, are the diagnostic tests. They predict those future outcomes before they solidify. Manager capability scores, organizational learning velocity, team-level trust indices, and psychological safety ratings. These are leading indicators. If your continuous measurement systems detect a sudden 15% drop in psychological safety within a specific engineering department today, you can mathematically predict a massive drop in retention and productivity in that department 6 months from now. Organizations that survive must heavily invest their resources based on leading indicators, intervening to solve structural problems before they manifest as irreversible lagging outcomes.
And crucially, for this entire system to maintain its integrity, this data cannot be hidden away in some secretive, password-protected HR dashboard that only executives see. It has to be democratized.
Transparent and highly accessible. When you make people operations data and work quality indicators visible to everyone in the ecosystem, managers, frontline employees, and senior leaders alike, it prevents the HR department from gatekeeping reality. It creates an environment of inherent, unavoidable accountability. A manager cannot hide a toxic subculture if their team's trust metrics are visible to their peers.
The source material mentions DaVita in this section, the massive healthcare and kidney care provider.
Yeah.
How do they handle this intense requirement for manager capability and transparent measurement?
DaVita is a phenomenal example because they prove that you have to treat manager development and people leadership with the exact same rigor and importance as you treat highly technical skills. They run an intensive, continuous leadership philosophy program called the DaVita Way. They understand that you cannot just take a brilliant, highly skilled clinician, promote them to a management position, and expect them to naturally, organically know how to navigate complex human dynamics, resolve conflicts, and build trust.
Right, being a great surgeon doesn't automatically make you a great chief of surgery. The skill sets are entirely different.
Precisely. So DaVita provides rigorous ongoing coaching. They build vibrant communities of practice where managers regularly convene to openly discuss their leadership failures and workshop solutions with peers. Most importantly, they evaluate and compensate their leaders significantly based on their ability to generate those team-based cultural and capability outcomes we just discussed.
So the message is clear. If your specific team is miserable, if your leading indicators for trust are in the gutter, and if you are constantly burning through top talent, it simply does not matter how brilliant your individual technical skills are. You are fundamentally failing at your core job as a leader at DaVita.
Exactly. And the final overarching capability required to sustain this massive organizational transformation is the implementation of continuous improvement and learning systems.
This part really resonates with me because it maps perfectly to the scientific method. Traditional HR departments have a terrible habit of reading a flashy article in a business magazine about a new best practice that Google or Apple just implemented. They eagerly copy it, blindly paste it into their own entirely different company, and then act shocked when it completely fails or causes a revolt.
It fails because organizational contexts, historical cultures, and operational realities are entirely unique. An imported best practice, stripped of its original context, will almost always produce inconsistent or damaging results. Instead of copying and pasting, organizations must begin to treat their HR interventions and policy changes as scientific experiments with clear, measurable hypotheses.
Run highly localized experiments. Capture user feedback rapidly, and only scale the interventions that actually prove effective in your specific, unique cultural ecosystem. Bridgewater Associates is the prime example cited in the text for this, right?
Yes, Bridgewater, the massive investment management firm, is famous and sometimes infamous for its culture of radical transparency. They take the scientific approach to human interaction to the extreme. They record internal meetings, they collect relentless, detailed, real-time peer feedback on almost every interaction, and they rigorously analyze the systemic patterns that lead to high or low-quality decision-making. Every employee has access to this data.
Which admittedly sounds incredibly intense. I don't know if the average worker would thrive in an environment where every single meeting is recorded and systematically analyzed for decision quality.
And the author readily acknowledges that Bridgewater's highly specific, intense approach would absolutely not fit all cultures, but the underlying foundational principle they demonstrate is universally applicable. You must treat your organizational structures, policies, and human practices as continuously improvable through systematic, data-driven learning. You have to build an organizational comfort with failure. Because when you run an HR intervention, say a new onboarding process, and it completely fails to improve your leading indicators, it isn't a disaster. It provides you with incredibly valuable, localized data about what your culture actually needs.
Test it. Measure the leading indicators, adapt the approach based on reality, and test it again. Do not just write a 50-page policy, put it in a binder, and forget about it for 10 years while the business suffers.
Exactly. It requires treating the organization as a living, breathing, evolving organism rather than a static machine.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've deconstructed a century-old industrial model and laid out a comprehensive blueprint for the future of work. It is a massive paradigm shift. But I want to distill all of this complexity down for you, the listener. Whether you are leading a team of hundreds or just trying to navigate your own career, if you take away nothing else from this deep dive into Westover's research, embed these 3 actionable principles into how you view the workplace.
First up, the shift in accountability.
Yes. First, we must ruthlessly shift from activity ownership to outcome accountability.
Right.
An HR department should not just celebrate running a compliant hiring process. They must be held mathematically accountable for the long-term quality and productivity of the hire. Meanwhile, the actual manager must take absolute ownership of the day-to-day reality of interviewing, selecting, and leading that human being.
Right. And second is about what we measure.
Right? Second, we have to measure what actually matters, and we have to make that data visible to everyone. Kill the vanity metrics. Stop bragging about time to fill or training hours logged, and start obsessively measuring the leading indicators. Team productivity velocity, deep psychological trust, and continuous capability growth. If the data is an autopsy, it's too late. Build diagnostics.
And finally, the third takeaway.
Third, build distributed capability. We have to stop hoarding human resources expertise inside a centralized bureaucratic silo. The future of HR is not being a gatekeeper. It is becoming a team of expert guides and system architects whose singular mission is to equip and empower managers to be incredible, autonomous people leaders.
Ultimately, it is about shifting our entire organizational philosophy. We must move away from managing the sterile administration of employment and pivot entirely toward elevating the fundamental quality, dignity, and output of the work itself.
Exactly. It is about treating adults like adults. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds heavily on the foundations of this research, but looks just over the technological horizon.
Oh, I like where this might be going. Let's hear it.
Think about the terrifyingly rapid advance of artificial intelligence and complex automation that we are witnessing right now. If AI and machine learning models completely consume and automate the administrative, the legal compliance, and the ticket closing elements of traditional HR within the next 3 to 5 years, which, looking at the technology, seems not just possible but highly probable what happens next. Will organizations be organically forced into this work quality model by default simply because the algorithms are flawlessly executing all the historical administration? Or, human nature and corporate self-preservation being what it is, will we just invent brand new artificial layers of bureaucracy for the AI to manage, just to maintain the comforting illusion of control?
That is a deeply profound question. What actually happens to the daily reality of the workplace when the traditional human resources department is functionally just a highly efficient algorithm running in the background?
Right. If the software is handling the payroll, the compliance, and the benefits enrollment flawlessly, then the only truly human element left in the entire equation is the localized interpersonal relationship between you and your direct manager. If that happens, then the trust architecture, the coaching capabilities, and the distributed leadership models we've been breaking down today aren't just an innovative best practice for progressive companies. They will literally become the only things that matter.
It ceases to be an HR strategy and simply becomes the entire ballgame. The companies that haven't built those leadership capabilities will simply fracture.
It is definitely something to think about the next time you're forced to navigate a clunky portal or fill out a 7-page form just to execute a basic task. Hopefully one day very soon, we can collectively tear the toll booths down entirely, dismantle the bureaucratic mazes, and actually just get back to doing the work we were hired to do.
I certainly hope so. The research proves a better way is possible. We just have to have the courage to build it.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We strongly encourage you to look at your own workplace structures, your own metrics, and your own management habits through this new critical lens. Challenge the friction when you see it. Demand better diagnostics. Until next time, keep questioning the systems around you, keep learning, and take care.